I would like to start by introducing my two guests. So two interesting guests that will debate with me. They will first make an introduction, and second, they will participate with me to answer some of the questions. So Gilbert, I would like to pass you the mic, and could you please tell us who you are and what you have done?
Yeah. Thanks, Arno. My name is Gilbert. I'm the CEO of Africa Cyber Defense Forum. As well, I'm the CEO of Innovice, which is a cybersecurity company. And of course, Africa Cyber Defense Forum is a platform that brings together private and public sector in the Africa cybersecurity industry. And above all, I'm a practitioner, professional cybersecurity professional. I've worked a lot in banking, government, handling fraud cases. That's pretty much about me. They can check my profile for more information. Back to you, Adam.
Thank you, Gilbert. This is very interesting, and we really want to have you here on board to have a zoom on the African continent and how fraud detections and automation using emerging technology can really help in this very attractive continent. On the other side, I have also Jonathan, Regional Sales Director for NetGuardian and specialize in that particular domain. Jonathan, do you mind introducing yourself?
Thanks, Arno. Thanks, Gilbert, and thanks everybody for joining. I'm Jonathan Summers, Regional Sales Director for NetGuardians in Middle East and Africa. I've been traveling and living and working around Middle East and Africa for the best part of 25 odd years, going back that long, with various companies, including some banks, including some core banking vendors, Finastra, Temenos, etc. So that's my background, from project management through sales, and now firmly involved with cybercrime prevention with NetGuardians, which we're delighted to be able to present to you today how we prevent crime, cybercrime, prevent fraud in real time for banks across the region.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very good introduction. So before starting, I would like to set a little bit the scene. So first of all, the dynamic of the webinar will be the following one. I will just set the scene. Why are we talking together? Why is Finastra and the NetGuardian, but also African Cyber Defense Forum are also part of this discussion. It's not like something tactical, it's actually more strategic. I will explain that as an introduction. Then I will leave the mic to Jonathan, who will give us and share with us his experience with NetGuardian, one of the leaders in that domain, and will tell us what is behind the foundations, the technology, and what is important and what's the benefits it can bring to your organizations. Then I will pass the mic to Gilbert and will ask him to zoom on Africa. I would like him to give us his insight. I would like him to give us the way the continent react to this problem and challenges and how we could help. Then I will pause, and then we will enter into Q&A sessions and the webinar. I will ask some questions to our panelists, but also we will take your questions, and I hope you will have a lot. And then I will ask them to give their point of view and feedback. If there is, for timing reason, some of the questions cannot be answered, don't worry. We promise you that within 48 hours we will collect all the questions, and then we will answer them one by one. And you can also have access again to replay the video. In between each session and sections, I would like to ask some pooling questions. That's very important. What is also very important for us is to have some pooling questions to understand in your region, in your area, how do you feel, how it's important. And then after that, because we are doing global and worldwide webinar, we will be able to compare the pooling and see the adoptions, the frequency, and how mature is that topic, depending on a different country or different region. And then at the end of our global roadshow, we will be able to send sort of a global view based on those responses. So this is why I really want to encourage you, please answer those pooling questions. It's very important. Again, if you do this effort, that's our ask. Our given will be to collect all them around the globe and give you a quick report. So now, without any further ado, I would like to start. So why are we together? So first of all, Finastra, the third largest fintech in the world, providing banking solution in most of the space that cover a bank, from the treasury, risk management, the lending, payment, and core banking, etc. And we have roughly 8,500 customers on the globe. I think there is a phenomenon of an acceleration of the digitalization of the bank. No need to come back to that. This is not the main point of the discussion. I think it's a given. It has been acknowledged by the entire industry that the digitalization is on the move. And most of the banks are telling us basically what they were supposed to do in 3 or 4 or 5 years, they are actually going to do in less than 1 year. And that also been an acceleration due to the pandemic. And that's one of the reasons. This fact, which is the digitalizations, let's say, raise the problem of having more and more, let's say, capability to detect and prevent fraud detections and being able to use far much better and emerging technology to be able to understand the pattern and detect in a much more almost in a real-time way what can happen versus doing in a more manual process and pass and have sort of not be able to track and trace those problems. For Finastra, we have so many customers. It has one of the largest requests we got, and it was important for us to answer to the market. Therefore, we decided to team up with one of the absolute key leader in that market called NetGuardians, and we have been working end-to-end together with our product team to integrate via our open banking platform called fusionfabric.cloud, where we are publishing open API that can help us to consume fintech such as NetGuardians from our core banking perspective, our treasury perspective, also our payment. We can consume directly in a real time those very smart models that has been done. So the reason of this partnership, as I said, is not a tactical story to do a good webinar, is actually to respond to a market trend, to respond to a very large demand, to automate and leverage all those emerging technology to reinforce the capability on a real-time basis to detect fraud. So that's basically set the scene. We have been working together. We start having our first customer in actually Singapore. For disclosure reason, I cannot reveal the name, but that now on the move, and we have more and more project or the discussion with many other banks, and that's pretty interesting. I would say the next webinar will be sharing experience. Today we are announcing, we are presenting, we have some early adopter. The next webinar will be ready to share experience. So I stop here, my introductions, and as I said, I would like you, dear guest, valuable guest, asking my first pooling question. So the way it's going to be, I ask the questions, you will get on the right side and open windows that will pop up, and then please answer and submit your response. We will get live, we will get the result. Then I will ask one of our panelists to comment to see if there is any surprise. So the first question is, my bank is concerned by the increasing fraud attacks during the pandemic. How do you see that? Please, here is the questions. I hope you can all see the questions which has just arrived. I give you a few seconds to answer that questions. Between strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. 15 more seconds. Please submit your response. And as I said, please, it's a ask, is not much to do. It will really help us, and you will get the result tomorrow. And as soon as you are ready, we can publish the result. So there we go. So if I start reading, basically it's like 60%, basically 60% agree or strongly agree. Jonathan, what is your response? Did you expect that?
Unfortunately, yes. I mean, it is a big problem now, especially since the pandemic hit. The fraudsters have taken advantage of people working from home, maybe interacting with a lot more online stores that they never did before. There's a lot more banking going on since the branches have closed as well. So yes, absolutely. This is unfortunately the trend, and it's something I'll come back to as part of my presentation. It's unfortunately, it is a problem. It's becoming worse, and we need to deal with it.
Thank you. Actually, I can see that still 11% actually strongly disagree. I would be happy to have a question in the chat to have a dialogue. What's the reason why this an interesting response? There may be something behind. More than happy to have the information and to share that. So without any further ado, I would like to pass the mic to you, Jonathan, and give us some trend and challenges and what's the value proposition that we can offer to the market. Jonathan.
Excellent. Thanks, Arnaud. So to set the scene, banks in 2021 are having to face new realities brought on obviously by the COVID pandemic, the move to digitalization, which has been accelerated because of the pandemic, branches closing, as I was just saying, and a huge increase in frauds we're seeing across the board. But even pre-COVID, analysts like KPMG and PwC were reporting a massive increase in the incidence of cybercrime, much of it targeting banks. All sorts of banks around the world are being targeted, some high-profile central banks. I'm sure you've probably heard of the Central Bank of Bangladesh case, but also regular retail, corporate banks, and much more and more we're seeing now in the marketplace in Middle East and Africa, smaller banks, SACCOs, MFIs. These fraudsters are totally unscrupulous, will go for anybody. They're targeting also the bank's customers more and more. As the banks tighten their own processes and procedures and core banking systems, the fraudsters are targeting the customers who are often unwitting accomplices to the fraud. We've all know of social engineering type fraud, identity theft, CEO fraud, invoice changing frauds. They're becoming increasingly common. The lady on the right here, you might recognize, she's one of America's most famous entrepreneurs. She's a presenter for the past 12 seasons of Shark Tank, which is known as Dragon's Den or Lion's Den in various countries around Africa and the Middle East. She's a self-made millionaire, incredibly smart, tech savvy, and yet even she was fooled into approving a transaction to fraudsters that almost cost her $400,000. So our point is, if she can be defrauded, almost, a correspondent bank had a system like ours that protected her, then if she can be targeted and almost lose that money, we are all susceptible. Everybody is susceptible. These fraudsters are incredibly sophisticated, incredibly persuasive, and incredibly successful, unfortunately, at stealing other people's money. So to provide some statistics about what's happening specifically in Middle East and Africa, PwC calculated a massive 128% increase in fraud, even before COVID, from 2018 to 2020. Various figures estimate the extent of fraud being lost, the extent of the amount of money that's being lost to the fraudsters. $6 trillion was a very conservative estimate done in 2020 by the end of 2021. We believe it's much more than that now. So big money being lost. And since COVID, fraud has actually become the #1 crime in a number of countries, including the UK. So if you can think of that, that means in some countries you're more likely to be a victim of fraud than you are to be a victim of pickpocketing or burglary or even car crime like speeding or being targeted that way. So you're more likely to be a victim of fraud than anything else. This is a serious problem. So many people in the UK and around the world have received strange text messages, supposedly from other people, that they then click on, and they're then seen as a potential target. And my own mother, for example, a few months ago received a text message supposedly from the post office. She ignored it, as you would expect. Lots of people do. They think it's a bit strange. Then she received a phone call from her bank saying, had she received a strange text message? And of course, it was the fraudsters. They were trying to get her to give more information. They were trying to get her on their side to give information about herself. Eventually, unfortunately, lots of people are being victims to this type of phishing fraud, where they're giving out more and more information to the fraudsters who pretend they're the bank. Eventually, after 2 or 3 days even of these kind of communications, the victim is so convinced they're actually talking with the bank The number has been spoofed, so it looks like the bank's phone number that's coming up on their phone. Everything the fraudsters do to convince the victims that they are the bank. They then convince the victim to transfer their money into a safe new account, and of course, that's them, and that's when they lose all their money. It has happened time and time again. Unfortunately, it's becoming a massive, massive problem for customers and for banks, particularly as the world moves to real-time payments. The banks must ensure you can protect your customers much more and more, and your own accounts. And that's where we come in. So NetGuardians, next slide, please, Arno. NetGuardians is a Swiss fintech company. We specialize for the past 10 years in preventing frauds for banks and their customers, and we're very, very good at what we do. We currently protect over 80 banks around the world, including 26 banks here in Middle East Africa, from all types of banking frauds, including, of course, internal frauds that unfortunately still account for a vast proportion of frauds in Africa, where I am. These can be very cunning or very basic, often involving collusion between back office and front office staff, and often not found by the core banking system. So we help supplement the information that we get from the core banking system to see exactly what's going on, and I'll come on to how we do that. So we also protect all sorts of payment and digital frauds, such as SIM swap, real-time, identity theft, channels frauds. And we update our customers, of course, on our website regularly. And this is taken directly from our website on the frauds that we've stopped. So the most high-profile frauds in Kenya, where I am at the moment, have to do with M-Pesa transfer, SIM swap frauds, and also invoice transfer, invoice changes, and CEO-type frauds. And that's where we protect our customers and our banks. The next slide, please, Arno. And this is how we do it. Sorry, the previous one. Back, please, on NetGuardians' unique approach. Perfect, thank you. So this is how we do it. We use a unique combination of technologies to determine in real time how likely every single transaction is to be fraudulent. Not just by setting up loads of rules that can be easily circumvented, but by implementing sophisticated 3D AI algorithms that pick up anomalies in the behavior of the account, the customer, and even the internal user. So I refer to rules. So fraud management systems used to rely on these rules to detect potential frauds, such as if a transaction is over a certain amount to a certain country, then flag it as fraud and stop that transaction. So that was okay for a while. That actually stopped a good proportion of the frauds. So for example, if I set up a rule that says over $10,000 to Russia, then stop that transaction and investigate. And that was okay for a while, but then the fraudsters, of course, found out about these rules, and they then just got around them. They would send a slightly smaller amount to a different country. So like $9,900 to Belarus, for example. So the bank or the customer would lose their money. The bank would have to apologize, often refund the customer, and then they'd have to set up a new rule for $9,900 going to Belarus. So you see the problem. You're always playing catch up. You're always trying to implement different rules, trying to second guess the fraudsters. There would be often hundreds, even thousands of different rules trying to catch those fraudsters out. So the other disadvantage, of course, you'd get customer friction. So legitimate customers would say, hang on, why are you stopping my transactions every single time? And it's costly for the bank to phone these customers and find out whether it's actually a legitimate transaction or not. And the third problem was legitimate Russian, for example, business people would get very annoyed at their transactions always being stopped. So good example of friction that banks need to avoid. As we know, you've got to retain your customers. So we've developed a much better way of identifying frauds. We focus on what the banks know about, which is your customers and your accounts and their accounts. So we use a range of artificial intelligence algorithms. We analyze each transaction in real time, and we determine whether it's fraudulent based on how different it is to the usual behavior of the customer and the account. So we maintain individual profiles for every single person, for every single account. So each transaction is checked against that type of behavior, whether it's normal or potentially fraudulent. For example, if I'm conducting a transaction to a new person, sending to a new beneficiary from a different location than I normally send to, or even on a different handset than I normally send to, then this would this would be unusual behavior for me. And we ought to be able to pick that up and say to the bank, this is suspicious based on a number of factors, and potentially ask the customer, or stop that transaction and then ask the customer whether that's actually what they want to be doing or not. So even if I'm supposed to be on holiday as an internal bank employee and transactions are going, or if more than one transaction is going through the same IP address, through the same computer, these are all kind of anomalies that we pick up using our AI and machine learning. So rather than rules, we've developed and refined a small number of what we call controls that constantly search out for these anomalies in the usual behavior of the banks and their customers. This is how we're able to prevent more fraud than any other system out there, and also reduce the number of false positives. So this is our key selling point. If you go on to the next slide, please, Arno. Speaking of costs, then NetGuardians has a very, very low total cost of ownership compared to other solutions in the marketplace, because we focus solely on bank fraud. We know how to detect and prevent bank fraud. So we've developed ready-made connectors to all the major core banking systems and channel systems around Africa. We're very experienced with doing that. We dramatically reduce the number of false positives that hit your customers, which obviously frees up the frauds investigation team to focus on the real frauds and being proactive rather than reactive. Saves a lot of costs, saves a lot of money, saves friction for your customers as well. And thirdly, our explainable artificial intelligence and machine learning technologies empower the fraud investigations team to show the customers exactly why their transactions are potentially fraudulent, which can be incredibly effective in retaining your customers. You can imagine the effectiveness of explaining to a potential victim of fraud that you've stopped a transaction that would have cost them their savings. You can explain why you think that's fraudulent, even if they themselves have authorized that payment. You can imagine the power of saying to that customer, we've helped you. They're going to tell their friends that that bank actually has my best interests at heart. So overall, a very low total cost of ownership, particularly when it comes to real-time implementations, real-time frauds. So I'd like to hand over now back to, I think we have a polling question, back to Arno. Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you, Jonathan. It was very insightful. So if I just try to pick up the main takeaway from that presentation. So one, the trend is there. I think it's not anymore a debate. You can just open any newspaper. There is that. So, and I think all the graphic and that we have and all the statistic prove that there is a trend and an acceleration of fraud, and which is also amplified because of digitalization. That's number one. When it comes to the tech NetGuardian providing solutions, what we can understand is you are specialized for fraud detection for bank. So basically everything we do, everything you do every single morning is to make sure that you can be better and better to fraud for the fraud detection for the bank, and that's your core business. To do that, you have used emerging technology which avoid the rule-based, but more using machine learning and AI to create pattern and then make that more explainable to African perspective. My dear guest, Gilbert, could you please tell us about, should we take the polling question now? If yes, maybe that's the better because he's on the screen. So I think let's do that now. So I'm concerned that the instant payment obviously will increase the fraud detections. Do you strongly disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree? You have a few seconds to respond. Please give me your thought.
Yeah, I don't know, is the question to me or the attendees?
No, that's for the attendees because the windows for the polling just pop up. So sorry, okay. Let's finish that questions before you start to have your presentations and view on the African perspective. So again, I repeat, please help us to better understand what you think, where you stand in your location. I like to make comparison between different country and region what's the appetite, what's the sentiment from the market. And as we said, as a return for your collaboration, you will get the result. So as soon as we have response, please display that on the screen. I understand that there is a little bit of challenge with the network, but that will be interesting to see what you see on that one. There we go. So here we have basically 75% between agree strongly and disagree. Gilbert, I would like to ask you to comment. Big surprise, not surprising?
No, I think it makes sense really, because real-time payment, and I think it ties well with the outcome of the polling, is a sense that now everybody is automating, or payments are being automated. So for sure, that's where the problem comes in. Rather, the attackers or the threat actors are going to be much more concerned to be able to find ways to exploit and be able to take advantage of this, because as we go to mission comes with the fact that the fraudsters, rather the cyber criminals, will always want to be, because if you are the motivation here is money. So if money is being transferred, talking about instant payment, then for sure, I fully agree with that outcome.
Thank you, Gilbert. So I would like, I really enjoy this picture. Actually, I have to admit I stole it now. So seeing this beautiful African landscape, could you please give us your perspective and what's your view on this phenomenon in your beautiful continent?
Yeah, I know. I have a big task. I'm talking for over 54 countries. So, and just to be specific, is that Africa, as much as a continent, but is also nuanced with different countries, which are quite specific, different environments. So, but rather, my submission rather will pretty much cut across, because it's what we are seeing. And I think I will now even say it's not just an African landscape, rather, but it's a global landscape, because what the submission you will see, or rather the scenarios we see, are pretty much cutting across. But I'll bring back a little bit the background. I only have 5 minutes. So the background, rather, with regards to fraud in Africa, comes from one thing. We're talking about banks. Now, if you look at the banking sector in Europe or banking sector in North America, it's totally different with the banking sector in Africa. So African banking sector, we're talking about the leaping. For example, we leaped from normal, the so-called mobile money. I mean, in Africa, you're talking about M-Pesa. It's not something you talk about when you're in London. You don't talk about M-Pesa. I was doing, for example, if you do a transaction between HSBC or a bank in the UK, sometimes you'll be surprised there's no transaction cost even in between the banks. And I'm sure Jonathan will attest to that. So in Kenya, for example, in Africa, let me be specific to Kenya, or rather East Africa in general, you find that M-Pesa has become a dominant player. And you're talking now about fintechs. If you hear about fintech, I'm sure Africa is also taking a very big leap in fintech. If you see, for example, what is happening in fintech, open banking, Africa is actually at the front line with regards to a lot of technology coming in. And this comes from the scenario, how is Africa rather positioned? So this aspect of fintech and adopting new mobile money came because most of the banks in Africa by those days used to have a bank account. It wasn't very easy. Not a number of Africans used to have bank accounts. So with the arrival of mobile money, now we're talking about mobile money 3.0, is that a good number of people were able to have access to, bank account, rather, in the sense that you're just able to have money in your mobile, with your phone number and your ID, you're able to have a bank account. And I think this became a new challenge. Yes, it was an opportunity for Africa talking about digital transformation, mobile money. But the challenge of fraud became much more complex, or rather different, if you compare to Europe or the United States or the North American continent, because now you're talking about mobile devices, you're talking about mobile money, you're talking about MNOs now being involved in money transfers. And that's where now most of the fraud you're seeing came first and foremost with regards to the environment where you have banks integrating rather with the MNOs, because banks, first and foremost, banks wanted to increase their bottom line, because that's always the goal of the bank. They want to have more money. So they started competing with the likes of M-Pesa, Safaricom, or telcos to be able to have more subscribers into their platform. Now, as you do that, what happened? You increase the landscape, the threat landscape increased. And the three elements you're seeing at that point, insider fraud became a very, very, big issue, for example, where number one, you find that even before I go to insider fraud, the first thing, let me maybe look at the mobile, or rather the third-party risk management. That's number one. Let me start from there. So you find that the third-party risk management became the major problem, rather, where fraud started. And this is where you find that there were mobile banking application vendors that were helping these banks to develop applications to be able to integrate, of course, with these MNOs. And this is where now you are finding that banks rather did not have in place right policies and procedures and controls to be able to manage the third-party risk management or third-party vendors. And you find that, of course, some third-party vendors became rogue. Some of them were developing applications that are not secure, and these vulnerabilities ended up exposing banks. So that's number one element. Number two, that is quite specific to Africa, is the angle that you now see the issue of insider fraud. Now, if you go anywhere in Africa, security is not something new in the sense of physical security. If you go in almost every single bank in Africa, you will find that maybe to get in, access control, physical security is quite watertight. First of all, you have pass-through security guards. There's a lot of, and the physical security has been there. The problem has been is that as technology advanced, we did not make more investment in cybersecurity or investment into the technology security as compared to physical security. So you find that banks, used to have guards. I mean, everywhere you see in Africa, you'll see a bank, maybe money being transferred with, general service units, police guards, and all that. But the cyber criminals do not need to have access to the bank physically to transfer money. So that's where the shift has come in the sense the banks have to understand that the risk has now changed. The risk landscape has changed from now a normal threat. You're talking about physical threat, but now you're talking about cyber threat. And that's another thing that I think risk management became a very, very big part that banks are lagging behind. And we see it across Africa. And these apply because I've spent a lot of time over 10 years, responding to some of these incidents. So the risk management, third-party risk management, and of course, the other part I've talked about is the unethical third-party application vendor. So the risk management is on the third party as well. Then the other thing comes into the insider fraud. So insider fraud has also become a big issue, and I believe it's not only in Africa alone, but it's also affecting also even other parts of the world. But specifically Africa, why I see insider fraud, I'll give a typical case that was handled by our team, because I wear two caps. I'm both a cybersecurity professional. Every day I spend on some of these frauds. So this specific case, as I make my submission, is that the guy you trust with your database, let's say, database administrator, DBA, this guy spends all the time, he does the configuration. He's the guy who's going to steal from you, and he's the guy who knows the controls that are in the bank. He knows what are the right controls, what are the control detection controls you have. And it's very, very hard to detect against insider fraud, because most of these people are people who have spent time in the banking sector. They've been in the organization, let's say, for 10 years. If you're talking about a SIM solution, he knows. If you're talking about database monitoring tool, he knows what are the controls there. And in this typical case, the perpetrator, after we handled the incident, was running a headless virtual machine. I will try not to go a bit technical, just to bring the picture. So the database administrator was running a headless VM in the sense that even most of the detection tools could not be able to see what this guy was doing, because he had created his own small network within the organization. So from there, what he did, he went to the back end of the of the database. He changed the signature of the client. He checked this was a dormant account, and when he checked the dormant account, he changed the signature and he changed the picture. I mean, it's very, very hard to detect, because this is a database administrator. From the activity monitoring, you might see this is a normal activity, part of his day-to-day task. How are you going to monitor by the fact that this update was done on the database is a fraudulent transaction, or rather a fraudulent activity? So that brings the angle with regards to insider fraud is still a big, big issue. I think it covers almost 60 or 70% of the frauds we see. there's that angle. And of course, the other things of putting in the right place, the right framework, risk management are the areas that the banks in Africa have to do a lot of work with regards to managing the risk, be third-party risk, internal risk, to be able to reduce the threat landscape, because now we're talking about integration every single day. I mean, you talk about Finastra amazingly, you know, in the fintech space. So as you integrate this, I believe Finastra also has a lot of clients in Africa. They're adopting, you know, everybody wants to be the guy ahead in terms of innovation with regards to, you know, fintech. But the question comes in, are we managing that risk that comes with fintech and also, you know, the digital transformation? So as I close my submission, because I only have 5 minutes before we move on, is that those are the 3 areas that we are seeing in Africa. Banks, as I summarize, banks had one goal, to increase their bottom line. Now what happens? They opened up. They adopted mobile. They now started competing with the MNOs who are taking into their market now. So they ended up opening up. They integrated with all these MNOs, mobile money, fintechs, open banking. Now the question comes in: are we ready to manage that risk? And I believe, back to Jonathan, that's why we're here to find how do we solve such challenges. And not only in Africa, but I believe it's a challenge that we're both facing with the COVID pandemic. Everybody is talking about transaction from your mobile. How do we do it? So to me, from Africa, that's the perspective I see every single day. Those 3 elements, banks have to work on: risk management, third party, and of course, insider fraud. Thank you.
Thank you, Gilbert. Absolutely well concluded, and I think you properly summarized that. And as you said, Africa is not necessarily one, is a amazing continent composed of multiple country jurisdictions and level of readiness when it's come to IT and risk management. Yes, the African continent has been ahead of mobile bankings and mobile wallet and exchange of the money. That's for sure ahead of, and then with ahead of many countries, especially with amazing fintech like M-Pesa. But now what needs to raise the bar is obviously on the risk management, which is probably slightly behind. We need the bank and the bank in Africa need to reinforce their fence and get ready and have the right level of equipment. Not let's say not a surprise that on the NetGuardian number of customers, maybe 30% are actually in that continent. Very interesting. Before I already got very interesting questions, I would like to jump to the third pooling questions, which is basically what are your bank's top fraud concern? Internal, external fraud attacks against the banks. Please give us your feedback. As I repeat again, those are the same question we ask in every webinar, and we would really love to see the different dynamic. Please answer the questions. And that's, by the way, this is a multiple, if I'm not mistaken, it's a multiple possible answer, if I'm not mistaken. So you don't have only one, you can actually pick 2. Yes, absolutely correct. So multiple answer questions, okay? So don't hesitate. Give us your feedback. And then we will start with some of the questions that I already collect. Very interesting. Operator, as soon as you think that we are right, please publish the result. Okay, so basically mostly outside, external. Okay, interesting. So I think we will have to, but still actually it's pretty, the internal fraud, that's an interesting one. The internal fraud, I think that has been probably very well outlined by Gilbert about making sure that actually internally you are also well protected, because the person that are dealing with the bank's database are also the one that are usually in the first positions to actually execute some fraud. Thank you again, everybody. I think there will be one more pooling. Without any further ado, in the last 15 minutes, we are perfectly in time. I would like to ask some questions. I notice all the questions you have been asked. So I would like to start with you, Jonathan. The first question I have is basically, as you said, the type of fraud is getting, new type of fraud is getting bigger and bigger and faster. How an organization such as a NetGuardian cope with new type of fraud? Do you have any recipes? How you do that?
Yeah. Thanks, Arno. Yeah, it's a real problem. There are so many different types of frauds out there, new ones being tried every day. Because there are thousands of fraudsters out there, they all share hints and tips on the dark web. There's even training courses for trainee fraudsters, would you believe? So the old adage of the teenager in his bedroom trying to get rich and trying to defraud the bank is no longer applicable. These guys are very serious, very well organized, very sophisticated. There are now thousands of criminals operating in sophisticated gangs, even state-sponsored. We've heard of up to 6,000 hackers estimated in North Korea alone, in one country alone, all targeted on stealing money from banks, from their customers, to try and help finance the country's ambitions. And that's just one country, 6,000, maybe more. We know how very sophisticated they are, and they are doing it day in, day out. So there's no way you could possibly second guess what these guys are trying to do. So we've realized that you can't just second guess these thousands of people, and that's just one country. There's other criminal gangs, of course, in the US, in the UK, in Iran, in Pakistan, all over the world. So we've taken a completely different approach to make sure that when we put our system into banks, it doesn't just cope with the frauds that you know about, because that's an easy thing to do with rules, and that's not going to be very effective, as we've proven before. So we've taken a radically different approach. We don't really care what types of frauds are being attempted, because we can focus on what the banks know about. And what you know about is your customers, their behavior, and the accounts that you use internal to the bank. So we analyze all those factors using our advanced 3D AI technology. We brought all that data together, and we can analyze whether each individual transaction is in line with the behavior. So that means that we don't care what type of frauds are being tried, because there will always be some kind of change in the factors that are involved with that account. For example, I mentioned different types of mobile handset you might be using would indicate a SIM swap, or maybe an internal fraud, the insider fraud that Gilbert was talking about. If there's multiple transactions from the same IP address, that means that somebody's got around the internal controls of the bank. These are the kind of factors that we take into account. So we don't really care. We don't really kill fraud. We will always be future-proof for our systems.
So that's interesting, because I will also jump into one of a question given by one of our auditor from Gilbert. But basically the question, and that's very in a direct line with what you said, is so basically what we are referring and what we are encouraging is the usage of more and more advanced AI type of machine learning models, which is sometimes also coming with in contradictory with the capability to the explainability. So sometimes one of the first things that you are being exposed to is, okay, I have a lot of AI, but what about the explainability? Is it going something to be recognized by auditor, etc.? So Gilbert, do you have a thought about the request, because you have more data, the request of using those technology, but in the same time, maybe a little bit less like explainability? Do you think it's contradictory, or actually it's go together? Gilbert, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think I just so you see, when it comes to fraud, and I think Jonathan has brought it quite out very well, is that there's no doubt. I mean, now we're in the world of AI, artificial intelligence, and all that. But of course, first and foremost, of course, it takes time, and I think that's what maybe the team as well at NetGuardian is also trying to do, because to train the models, it takes time, right? Because AI is evolving. And having these technologies, because now the cyber criminals themselves are adopting artificial intelligence. So in the sense, what I'm trying to see here is that, yes, we have the technology, because for us to be able to beat the criminals, we have also to be able to ahead of the game. And don't forget as well, themselves, they have access to these technologies. They're going to use them as well. So being ahead of the game, using advanced technologies that are able to prevent against fraud is always a good investment, as long as you know what exactly you're looking into, as long as you know exactly what exactly you want to achieve from the technology. I believe it's really necessary to have that layered approach when it comes to defense, because every single layer you add, makes you safer and protects the organization.
Gilbert, I think staying in the same again in the same, let's say, domain. How are willing the banks in Africa to start reporting incident and actually being open about it? From different country, you were talking about the difference with other country. I would like to see what about the openness, willingness to report and disclose incident. What do you think in Africa?
So to bring you back to Africa, and I always like, Africa is a hot place. You don't talk about Africa as one country. I have to be very,
You're
very
right.
specific.
You're right. Yeah.
So Africa is wide. And in as much as we're talking about a continent, it's not like, for example, if you're in Europe, you're talking about the European Union, right? We're talking about EU GDPR. So Europe has advanced in a good level when it comes to reporting, because when you look at the EU GDPR elements, at least with regards to an incident, you're expected at least to report it within 72 hours, right? In case there's an incident, because it's part of EU GDPR, compliance, right? You are also expected, in case there's any fraud, in case there's any incident and you don't report it, there is also the enforcement angle. So that environment in Europe makes it quite, the enforcement is there. Remember, we've evolved from data protection now to EU GDPR. It's an evolved way which has brought also companies or other organizations to be much more conversant of the fact that they need to report. It becomes an obligation, if that makes sense, because of the regulation. Now, in Africa, it's different, because if you go to Kenya, Kenya passes Data Protection Act. But if you read it as well, what exactly they implement, what they call the enforcement laws or regulations. If you go to Nigeria, you have the Nigeria Data Protection Bill. I think, and less countries in Africa have also passed data protection laws or other bills. So the enforcement comes in Africa in terms of the legislation part is a little bit still lagging behind, because if you're reading well, you realize that out of there was Malabo Convention, there was Africa Data Protection, Africa Data Convention that was passed in 2014. But if you look at that convention, only 14 out of the 54 countries have passed or ratified it. So you realize the legislation is lagging behind. And this makes it quite interesting that the banks do not have that level of obligation. So you find that most of them are not reporting this because the requirement, or rather the regulation, doesn't oblige them. You see some legislation with regards to maybe the central bank, the regulators, trying to enforce some of these requirements, but still then you still find that there's some countries that are still lagging behind. Fine, I know Kenya is doing some good work. The central bank requires bank to report some of these incidents, but again, it's still not that open as if you were to compare with Europe. If there's an incident in Europe tomorrow, I mean, remember the European Central Bank had an incident, it was reported because it is part of the requirement. But in Africa, you will never know some of this, because it is, first and foremost, the culture rather in Africa is that if you report an incident, there's also the angle of stigma, in the sense that I don't want to report an incident to end up, losing my reputation. You end up losing clients. So there's also that fear, if that makes sense. So the regulation needs to come into place to be able to ensure that, at least, because you only learn, because I'll give you an example. You might be shocked that the bank next door was compromised by the same attack vector, and the other bank next door doesn't know, because there's no clear information sharing with regards to the threat, or rather the attacks happening. So I think that's where Africa is lagging behind, and those are the areas I believe needs to improvement. Back to you.
For sure, I think it's pretty true, but in the same time, I think the international bank in Africa need international partner, and if they want international partner, if they want to attract international partner banks, they will have to apply the best practice, such as disclosure and reporting. So I think it's an egg and chicken story. So I think you are right. There is a lot of effort to be made, but I think we are getting there. Jonathan, I would like to come back to those two questions, because they are very similar. It's about, I think people are getting convinced that this is the type of new technology that we need. But let's clarify a few things. As soon as I've done and made the effort to connect my enterprise fraud detection platform to the different core, am I ready to start? Or should I then spend another set of months and months to train my system before being able to detect my first fraud? How can you advise and give us some guidance on that aspect, Jonathan?
It's a really good question, because that's what used to be the case. For artificial intelligence to learn the types of behaviors of accounts, etc., used to take a long time for machine learning to kick in and be valuable. But we've developed our processes and our AI algorithms to be effective from day one, because we can come preloaded with what we know to look for, because we have experience of over 80 banks around the world now. We know what fraudsters are going to be doing, so we can then provide that information. So from day one, as part of the implementation, we would have analyzed all the bank's data. So an implementation would typically take about 12 to 16 weeks, as opposed to months or even years that used to be the case. During that time frame, we would have analyzed the bank's data. So from day one, we're actually effective. And a really good example of that is a bank in Kenya, where I live. We implemented November 2019, I think it was, and within a month of go live, we actually helped prevent them stop a fraud that would have cost them over $500,000. This is through our own technology that was assessing abnormal behaviors that were happening to an ATM that was being taken out, the velocity checks, the timing of those withdrawals, even though it wasn't actually a customer, the money had been moved into an M-Pesa account, so it's another factor that we were able to help them with. We were able to determine that within 1 month of go live and help the bank, and that actually paid for the system for a number of years for them. So yes, new technology enables you to be effective from day one. And of course, the AI learns, the machine learning keeps continuing to become more effective as it gets more transactions, as the systems grow, as it learns what is a normal type of behavior.
So thank you, Jonathan. I really want to take you to get another question. I think it's fascinating what I got on question, but I just want you to get again this one. It's pretty simple. This one is we definitively understand that we need to implement such a product. So I have two challenges. Number one, when I start reading documentations and white paper and so on, I have a lot of different kind of keywords such as AML, compliance screening, fraud detection. Number one, I need a view on that one. Second, obviously, there are close to 50 vendors claiming that they can do something in that area. How can you help us to move and then try to make the right decision, knowing that today we have something more or less manual, so it's starts from zero? What would be your fair recommendation?
A very good question, and a very common question as well. People are getting confused by what's in the marketplace. I'd like you to flick forward, please, to the documents that people can download that can maybe help answer that question. That one there. So if you'd like more information in general terms about all types of frauds, this is a good place to start. Our website provides information about any types of frauds that we can help prevent. Internal frauds, insider frauds that Gilbert talked about, and the external frauds, which are becoming more and more of a problem, as we saw from the polling question, external frauds affecting your customers. And the basic premise between fraud management systems and anti-money laundering systems, which is always used to be combined into one, is easy. Anti-money laundering systems, every bank has. You have to have it to be regulated by the central bank, and it helps protect you to be compliant. It makes sure that you are not fined by the central bank for non-compliance. That's all well and good, but a fraud management system like ours would actually help prevent you from losing money yourselves by the fraudsters. So that's the main difference between the two. That's the main difference between the two types of systems.
Thank you. So 2 minutes left. So one, I would like to go back very quickly, please, and I would like to conclude by making an offering to you, valuable guests. So number 4, putting questions. Would you like to learn more about how NetGuardian and can protect you? For this, I will leave you to answer those questions, and in parallel, just to respect the timing. So I'm not going to read the results. So I'm going to move straight to the conclusion. So again, those are very interesting. I actually look at some of them. Please look at that. You have the QR code and it's working. It has been tested. So please enjoy the reading. That already give you a much more information. The second is what we are also proposing in partnership. NetGuardian and Finastra would like to offer to all of the guests 45 minutes, let's say, free advisory discussion on one-to-one basis. Really a discussions. It's not about a demonstrations. It's a discussions about what's the challenge you have, what would you like to solve, or potentially sharing. It could be a curiosity discussions. So it's not about product demonstration. It's about having a discussions about where do you stand, what you are aiming, what your challenge, or even us continue to give you more instant feedback. So please contact us. We are offering to all of you a 45 minutes free advisory call with 2 experts in that domain, absolutely expert, just to talk about your case, not global case, but your case, and see if there is any smart, let's say, roadmap or journey that we could do together. So without any further ado, first of all, I would like to thank you, Jonathan, very inspiring discussions. Gilbert, about your passions, I can feel it, the passions about Africa. It's an amazing continent, and also all the difference between one country to another. That's probably what makes Africa unique, and the desire for adopting more technology. And thank you for the organizations, the behind the scenes. There is a team that has prepared and organized the whole call. Thank you again. Dear guests, as I said, you will have access first to the QR code. You can download the book, the different documentations. We will answer all the questions that cannot be answered, and you will get that in 48 hours. You will get access to review the presentations. And again, we would like to invite you for those 45 minutes free advisory sessions. I would like to thank you all, wish you a very good day wherever you are, and talk to you soon. Thank you very much, and enjoy your day.